Hi there. To celebrate 300 episodes, I've got a gift for you. Visit papernapkinwisdom.com, scroll to the bottom, and in the contact form, just write the word book, fill in the rest of the information, and you'll get 3 free ebooks. The Demand Blueprint, the Profit Blueprint to help you master cash flow, and the Paper Napkin Wisdom Gratitude Ritual. Over $25 in value, no strings attached.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govind Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govind Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 309. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to flourish no matter what life throws at them, while others, equally talented, are constantly just trying to keep their heads above water? There's something deeply human about that struggle, the pull between what it takes to survive and daring to step into something greater. Today's guest, Jon Rosemberg, has spent his life exploring that very space, where science meets choice, and where our old patterns meet the possibility of something entirely new. Jon is a behavioral scientist, an executive coach, and the author of A Guide to Thriving, a book that dives into how we can break free from survival mode and consciously reclaim our agency. In this conversation, we explore how meaning, safety, and awareness connect to the deepest parts of what it means to live well. And somewhere along the way, Jon shares a deceptively simple message, one that will challenge how you see your instincts, your habit, and your potential. As you listen, notice what resonates. Notice where you're merely enduring and where you may begin to choose something different. And today, we're talking about what it truly means to go beyond survival. Let's listen in. Jon Rosemberg, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thank you, Govind. It's such a pleasure to meet you and to be here and to share ideas with you.
Yeah, well, you know, it's always fun to meet somebody who's familiar with the show, because you know what to expect, and you said that you were, so it's an honor. I always get a little shy about it when guests come on and they're familiar with the show, so it makes me feel good. So
then we're both shy, which is
yeah,
good.
exactly. Well, which is not shy but not shy kind of thing, which is great.
Yeah.
You shared a really interesting napkin with me, and I'm really looking forward to digging into it. You said survival is instinct, thriving is a choice, and you've underlined choice exceeding, it's almost like an arrow underlining choice. It's fantastic. Why did you share that?
Well, let's take a couple steps back and try and define what survival is and what thriving is in that napkin. And I think survival or survival mode is this 911 kind of like firefighting response that a lot of us experience often throughout the day. I'm sure some of your listeners, when they're watching the news or when they're interacting with family members, we just had Canadian Thanksgiving, we can get this reaction, this survival mode reaction, which feels like our life is being threatened. Even though we know that physically we're safe, it can feel that way. So that would be survival. And then thriving is when we can be our authentic selves, when we feel calm, connected, creative, and we get to engage with the world in our full and authentic way. Now, instinct is an automatic response, as most of us know. So if you're walking in the bushes and you suddenly hear a little brush, think about a couple thousand of years ago in the savannah, it might have been maybe not a couple of thousand, maybe a couple of 100,000 years ago. It might have been a saber-toothed tiger or something trying to chase you and eat you. So that survival response, that survival mode response was really, really helpful. It was very adaptive. It would help you fight, flight, or whatever it is that you needed to do to survive. So it was very instinctual. Thriving, on the other hand, is a choice. And by choice, I mean it's a way for us to lean into our agency. And I define agency as the capacity to make intentional choices supported by the belief that those choices matter and have an impact in the world. So I'm very big on agency. I discovered it later in my life. I would say for the first 40 years, I was in survival mode. And the moment I discovered agency and I became aware of it, it was a life-changing revelation. So that's kind of like the high-level theoretical framework behind the napkin.
I love that. I wonder, so there's a lot there, right? And there's a lot about, talk about instinct playing a big role in that, Jon, and instinct moving us, this fight, flight, survive. But instinct does more than that, doesn't it? It's more than just protecting us. Instinct can guide us to other things. But what I feel really interesting about this is that you say choice is leaning into agency. What do you mean by agency? I think a lot of people use words like agency without really understanding what that could mean for them.
Yeah, so agency is making intentional choices. So let's think about somebody who's maybe... Actually, let me give you an example from my own life. A few years ago, I was I had what I thought was my dream job as COO at a really fast-growing startup, and I was very grateful that I finally had reached what I thought was the peak of, power, wealth, reputation. It was a big deal for me, and somehow I felt extremely unfulfilled, and there was a part of me that felt I could not leave this job. I said, this is my job. It became my identity. I became closely tied to it. And the moment I did that, I effectively erased the potential choices that were available to me. Because I said, well, I can't leave this job because, I like the paycheck and the lifestyle that it provides me, or I like the fact that I have a big team with hundreds of people, et cetera, et cetera. Agency started for me the moment I realized, okay, this is all true for me in this moment, but it's not the only choice available to me. There are other choices. And the moment I started considering those choices, so the most obvious one was to walk away and quit, right? So that's just one more choice. I think agency evolves once we start seeing a rainbow of choices. So it's not just I either stay or I walk away, but here are all the other things that I could do. I could stay and change my job or change my job title or change the company or change the culture. Or I could leave and start my own business, which is what I ended up doing. So I think to me, agency is this capacity to make intentional choices in our life.
Capacity to make intentional choices. I love the way you say that. And I wonder about it from the perspective of, how big is intention as part of that? I think that's something we can control as a first step to it, right? Like, who do we need to be? What is our intention for this? And I heard something a few weeks ago, which really has stuck with me, which is we tend to judge ourselves or assess ourselves based on our intention and others by their actions. And how does that relate to all this? What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's a powerful insight. I think so. I think of intentionality as the moment where we engage, call it our prefrontal cortex. It's the moment where we engage our thinking selves, where we're not coming from a place of just reacting to whatever life is throwing at us. So we get to actually pause. And I use this method called the AIR method with my clients. And AIR stands A for awareness, I for inquiry, and R for reframing. So the general idea is that if we can take a moment and be aware of what's happening in the moment. So what are the thoughts that are going through our head, the emotions that we're feeling, the sensations in our body? The moment we sit with that awareness, and a lot of folks call that mindfulness, but there are many other names and many other practices, then we can go into inquiry, the I in air, and get really curious about it. So start asking lots of questions. What is really going on here? And what's the story? And where is this story coming from? And then from there, we can go into reframing. And for example, if we're going through a difficult moment, like losing a job, and a lot of folks are losing jobs these days, right? We can reframe that as, this is not my failure, but it is an opportunity for learning and for finding something else in my life. Now, I don't want to downplay the curveballs that life can throw at us, and some of them can be very challenging. And pain is real. Let's not kind of convert this into saying, just think positive and everything will be okay. But it's agencies having that ability to be intentional about how we engage with life, no matter what it throws at us.
Yeah, it's that really resonates with me. I mean, what you're very simply saying is moving from the place that life is happening to you to, what is happening for me? How do I make this happen for me? And how am I at the center of this? And I want to go back to how this all came about for you, right? You have now, you ascended to for what a lot of people would say is the peak, the pinnacle, the cherry on top of the sundae. You'd achieved everything. You not only had the CEO role with a fast growing startup, but you were post funding. Like this was the stressful period like what a lot of startups call the really hard parts of validating the model, iterating the model, and getting that model rapidly accepted. You'd gotten through that. You were on the other side of that to actualizing some of that hard work when all of these things came up for you. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and I think in the moment, I found myself going through burnout. I realized that everything that I had worked so hard for, Govind, what happened was I had just gotten back from a trip in Los Angeles where we were looking at some properties for expanding the business. And I came back, I got hit with COVID. This is at the end of 2021. And I was on a call with some of the folks on the team, and we got into an argument. And the argument, it's irrelevant what the argument was about. It escalated very quickly. It escalated because I was in that deep state of survival mode. So in that moment, I closed my laptop. I shut off my phone, which is something I hadn't done since I had joined the startup. And I went downstairs, and my two kids, I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old, were playing with their Legos. This was a few years ago, so they were a little younger. They were playing with their Legos, and I just sat on the floor, no screens. It was the first time that I actually detached myself from the screens. And I started just playing with them, and I realized how much I was missing. I realized that I hadn't been present for them. Even though I worked from home some days and they could see me in my office and whatnot, I wasn't really present for them. And that realization hit me hard. So that evening, I was sitting in my favorite chair in my living room, and I just kind of covered my face with my hands. And Adriana, my wife, approached me and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I think I'm done." And it took, I would say, maybe 2 weeks for the partnership and the relationship with the startup to end. And it was a difficult moment, I can say, and it was a moment that allowed me to find the ways in which I wanted to thrive. So I ended up founding a consulting company, and now, just more recently, I started with my partner Lara American. She's the founder of Lara Bars. I don't know if you've ever had them; they're delicious. But we started Anther, which is an organization where we engage with businesses to help them thrive, to help them and their people thrive.
Yeah, there's so much there. And I really appreciate you sharing that. The question that I was going to ask you, but you sort of answered it, was how did you recognize the signs of burnout? And it sounds like you kind of got overwhelmed by them, and to the point where you did something that was out of character, putting your laptop down, closing your laptop and putting your phone down, like turning it off, not just putting it down, turning it off and walking away. But I love what comes next. It's sitting on the floor and playing with your kids. And it's you talk about awareness, and you talk about awareness being something other than mindfulness. And it really is. In your case, that awareness was present moment awareness. And nothing brings you into the present moment like sitting on the floor and playing with your kids.
You got it.
There is nothing. There is no faster way to get into a positive state of present moment awareness than that. Is there?
I agree with you. I think it was a very, very special moment. And because we were playing with Legos, I started tapping to that creative part of my brain while I was connecting with my kids. And I was like, I need more of this in my life. Eventually, Govind, that led me to go back to school and get my master's in applied positive psychology. And that all eventually led me down this path of writing a guide to thriving and sitting here with you, recording this podcast today.
Yeah. So you still brought out your CEO hat and operated the crap out of it once you figured it out. But still, I love the present moment awareness. Okay, so look, my kids were once the age of your kids then, and I know it's been several years since the time that you were on the floor playing with the kids. But what are some things that we can do now to bring us into that state of awareness, in that present moment awareness? How do we get to the present moment fast before getting to that place where we have to hit the wall and burn out and turn off everything and remember also, I don't want to lose this, that you did something uncharacteristic for you, which is just totally lose it on some people on the phone, right? I mean, I think you were more mild about the way you retold the story, but there's no place for that kind of emotion in a work environment, and that's not how you'd characterize yourself at all. So you did something really out of character and stopped yourself, which is really brilliant. And that was a choice. But let's talk about how people can recognize that, because sometimes it's a bit of a slow burn to get there, right?
It is. For most of us, it is. I think the key is turning subject into object. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times we're kind of subject to our experiences, right? We are just going through it in the moment, and we don't get a chance to self-distance from it, to take a little bit of distance from what is happening. This is what awareness can do. And in my experience, it often starts by naming what is happening in the present moment. One of the hardest things for me, Govind, was to start naming my emotions. I grew up in Venezuela. I spent most of my early life there, which is why I felt like I was in survival mode for the first 40 years of my life. It's
because you were.
Because I was. And I'm grateful I was, because I might have not survived had I not been in survival mode. So survival mode can be really helpful in certain situations. And so when I was in this state of survival mode, for me, there were basically two emotions. I was either happy and laughing, or I was angry. And everything else in between. Can you imagine? There's such a spectrum of emotions today. We know there's probably dozens of them. There's research that indicates that there's about 27. In any case, for me, a big step into thriving was starting to name what was happening for me. So if I felt sad, to actually acknowledge that I was feeling sad, that was a very difficult thing to do. And that really helped me. If I was, and disclosing my anger. A lot of times we feel anger and we express it towards other, like I did on that call, and we don't actually acknowledge it or recognize it. And I think just naming things can be really helpful. And in my experience, this often happens not by ourselves. It happens in connection with others, having folks around us that can, see us and hold space for us and connect with us in a meaningful way. So yeah, I would say for me, that's step number one in awareness. It's to give things names.
I love how you talk about that, naming it, and one of the ways that I talk about is notice. Catch yourself and notice it, and then give yourself a big pat on the back for noticing it. Right? The thing may be associated with a negative emotion, like anger or sadness or guilt or whatever, fear. But if you notice it, you move yourself to the cause side of that equation pretty fast, and you can give yourself a little pat on the back, can't you?
Exactly.
And that just like that little tiny bit of momentum is really useful, isn't it, Jon?
It is. And I think the pat in the back is one of the most important parts of this, right? To actually give yourself some credit for it. We are our harshest critics by far. It's funny because once I went on my own and started building the consulting company and then Anther and then writing this book and all of that, Adriana often says to me, she's been with me. We've been together for 24 years. And she says, in 24 years, and I was in the corporate world for over 2 decades, mind you, she says, you are the worst boss you've ever had. You are the worst by far. So it's interesting, right? How we can be so tough on ourselves. So another, in terms of inquiring and the I in air, which I mentioned earlier, one of the questions that's really helpful is trying to think, how would somebody else react to the situation that you're experiencing? How would a friend talk to you? What would a friend say to you, right? In this moment that you're going through something so hard, they would say, hey, Jon, you got really angry on that call. And I get it, man. You haven't slept in 2 weeks. You just got back from a trip. You got COVID. It's clear that you're tired and you're exhausted, and this is not the way that you want to show up. And yet this is how you did. So what can you do now to repair? And I think that's a much more constructive way than saying, oh my God, I really screwed up that call. I should have done X, Y, and Z, should have, would have, could have, So the tyranny of the should, as they call it.
Okay, you said this, and we're going to get to Adriana in a second because she sounds incredible. But you are the worst boss you've ever had. Now, she's not saying that you're the worst boss for other people that they've ever had. She's saying that you're the worst boss for yourself.
You got it.
You've ever had. And so I want to make that distinction because I don't know that would have landed for everybody, but that's a huge comment, right? That this tape recorder we play to ourselves is not always constructive, and noticing that can help to change that tune, can't it?
You got it.
Just change the track.
We can, and awareness is usually the first step. Now, thank you for making that clarification. That's exactly what I meant. She asked me just a few weeks ago, she said, hey, listen, I can tell that you're doing all of these things. Now you're going on interviews and, your plate is quite full these days. And I'm noticing that you're starting to get overwhelmed. What would you tell one of your, team members if they were going through the same thing? I said, take a vacation. I don't want to see you in a week. You can work on whatever you want, but not this. So take a vacation, disconnect, no email, no phone, no nothing. And she's like, well, what would it take for you to do that? I say, oh, no, that works for everybody else. It just doesn't work for me. So it's funny, we hold ourselves to a very different standard than we hold most people.
I love that. And I don't want to leave that. So what would you say to someone else? The standard that we hold for somebody else, how have you been able, because part of your method, part of your AIR method is reframing. So how does that work now that you've brought the awareness that you might be getting a little burned out? You ask the question, what would I do about it? How do you reframe that? Oh, that works for everybody else, to no, I'm going to do something for me. What does that look like for you?
I think for me, step one is trying to name the belief underneath. Before we can reframe, we need to actually understand the structure of it. So a belief that comes up for me often is, unless I'm productive, I'm not good enough. Right. And I've heard this in with many clients and in conversations with friends. It's a very common belief to say, if I'm not productive, I'm not good enough. Once we name the belief, we can actually get curious about it. What does it really mean to be productive, right? And you can ask questions. What about somebody who can't produce for whatever reason, for experiencing a physical disability or a psychological disability? Does that mean that they're worth less than I am? And then you start kind of poking holes around the belief, and you can say, my value, you can reframe the belief and say, my value doesn't depend on how productive I am. So that would be a reframe of that belief. Or I have fundamental value as a human being, as a person who's in existence. And listen, the possibilities of you and I having this conversation, Govind, are infinitesimal. The fact that you and I are both alive and having this conversation is a miracle in itself. So recognizing that, and in the book, I go into transcendence and what transcendence means, recognizing how lucky we are to be alive and to experience this thing we call life, despite the fact that, yes, there's a lot of pain in the world and there's a lot of suffering in our lives. But we are very, very lucky. So that's a reframe. It doesn't make the pain go away. It doesn't make the suffering go away, but it does allow us to engage with it in a very different way.
I like that. It reminds me immediately of an amazing video by brother David Standel Rast, and he narrates in this beautiful euphonious voice this message of gratitude, and he talks about it in terms of look at the colors. Look at how wonderful it is that we can experience colors, the bright colors, the dim colors, the dark colors, the exciting colors, all of these beautiful colors that are just presented for you to enjoy. So noticing this, bringing us and recognizing the fortune, the beauty of the moment, whatever it happens to be, is a really quick way to reframe. I want to also talk about, it sounds like you and Adriana have a very special relationship. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge in relationship how significant the impact is of having a partner that we can be vulnerable with is, and how focusing on her helps her sort of shed light on things for us. It sounds like that's been very critical for you.
It's been incredibly critical. And as a matter of fact, I would say one of the big reasons why I decided to publish A Guide to Thriving is because of Adriana's experience. So Govind, 2 years ago, we were on a trip in Denver. We were at a conference, and Adriana started having double vision. And at the beginning, we thought it was the altitude or the trip or whatnot. When we came back to Toronto, she said, listen, this isn't going away. I said, okay, let's go to the emergency room. So we ended up going to the emergency room, and they couldn't tell us what was wrong with her. They did some tests, and a couple of days later, we were sitting in, it's called a neuro-ophthalmologist office in St. Michael's. I didn't even know that specialty existed. And we were sitting in, this room with artificial lighting in one of those ophthalmologist chairs. Adriana was sitting there. And the doctor walks in, and without warning, he says, you have MS. I did not know what MS was. And of course, Adriana was sitting there in shock, and she started breaking down. And I started Googling, what is MS? What does it mean? What does it mean for her life? It was a very, very difficult moment. And we've been trying to deal with it. It's very difficult. Folks who have to deal with progressive conditions in life know what that's like. And her courage and her ability to reframe her situation have been a real inspiration to me. She's studying social work, and she went to do social work with children with disabilities. Then she went to work with families that are dealing with long-term illnesses or death by suicide. So she's really leaned into helping others as a result of her diagnosis. And that's been such an inspiration to me. And it showed me how you can find meaning in life, which we're all chasing. And I would say meaning is in how we engage with others. We often try to find meaning, in our Western world, we've been so focused on ourselves and how do we get better? How do we improve? And what I realized in seeing Adriana go through this journey and this process and being there with her is how by helping other people, by making other people matter, her life got better, and her agency in confronting this condition where she had no control, because there's very little control when you're diagnosed that way. She found that, and that's been a real inspiration to me. Thank you for asking that question.
That's amazing. I have this thing that I like to say, that the best way to gain momentum is by giving it away.
Yes.
And it's amazing what happens to us when we give real momentum to other people, when we really give people that agency. So let's go back to that. If you're finding yourself stuck and trying to find agency, giving it to other people can give you a moment to get it. But doing it and releasing the outcome is the best way to do that, which is really incredible.
What a beautiful reflection.
Well, and it's amazing how she's done that. And it's amazing how you've done that. Both of you have taken these challenges, these crises of meaning, and turned them into purpose, which is ultimately aligned with this philosophy of gaining momentum by giving it away. How much of your upbringing, the way you saw the nation struggle and the way you saw your family probably struggle, how much of that is built in your desire to give back?
I think a lot of it. My grandparents on my mother's side escaped the Holocaust. That's how they ended up in South America. And on my father's side, escaped the pogroms of Lithuania. Then they went to Cuba, where they got kicked out by Fidel Castro when Castro came into power. And then my story started in Venezuela. So I come from a long line of survivors, of people who've lived in survival mode. And what I want to do with this work and with all this research and all this learning that I've done over the past, call it 7 years, is hopefully leave behind for my children and my nieces and whoever this work resonates with, an opportunity to thrive even in the face of circumstances that called for us to be in survival mode. Because I believe number one, I believe our humanity requires us to thrive more for us and for others. And number two, I think we have this gift that not many other, as far as we know, not many other species have on this planet or in the universe. We don't know about it yet. There might be. We can get into that. But we have this gift of having agency. And it's interesting that sometimes we forget about it because we are so pressured by external circumstances. So I think that's where I'm coming from with this work.
I like that you talked about how we forget about it, because I think that the journey really is about becoming who we really are, and we forget who we are. And then the journey is about remembering what's already there. And growth is about subtraction. It's about letting things go so that you can move forward. I don't wonder if you noticed this when you talked about your family. You said they escaped and escaped and escaped. And then you said that you want to leave something behind. So instead of it being an escape, you're leaving something, a legacy. That I think that's really important to you, isn't it, Jon? Like what you're leaving for your family, but not just for your family, but for communities, for people around you, for people who need it.
Yeah. And Govind, over the past 20, 25 years, science and research, we've advanced so much in understanding how we thrive as humans. And that information is not readily available because we are so focused. Our negativity bias is so honed in on everything that's going wrong in the world that there isn't a lot of space to understanding and engaging critically with all of the things that are going right. By all measures, Govind, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation 100 years ago. And I'm not talking about the technology. I'm talking about the fact that our life expectancy has doubled in the last 100 years. People would live to 32 100 years ago. Today, it's at least a couple of years ago, last I checked, it was 71. We've never had so much access to education and clean water and sanitation and healthcare across the board. Across the board, there are parts of the world, of course, that are going through very difficult times, and yet, as a species, the human race, I mean, by some measures, we're living in the golden age of humanity, and we don't get to see that because we are so bombarded with everything that's negative around us, and our brains are designed for that negativity bias because it was a way to survive when we were in the savannah, thousands of years ago.
And that's the core of what you're saying, I think. You said that we don't get to see it, but what I think you really mean is we could choose to see it.
Yes.
We don't get to see it, but we could choose to see it, couldn't we?
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Exactly. And that's what agency does. It gives us the ability to choose intentionally how it is that we are going to engage with life.
So it sounds like intentionality plays a really big role for you. And I can imagine that that's not by accident. It's a proactive act every single day. Am I right in saying that, Jon?
It is. It is. And it's a practice, right? It's a skill like any other. I think the more we practice, the more we develop it. And it's hard at the beginning. For sure it is. And the way I describe the road from survival mode to thriving is as a spiral, not as a straight line. And what I mean as a spiral is that sometimes we're thriving and we're moving up in the spiral. And sometimes things happen, either to us or in the world that send us down that spiral again. And then we get to choose how we want to come up again. And it's a process. And like I said, both modes, survival mode and thriving mode, are highly important to have in our lives. And if we get to choose which one we're engaging with life with, my goodness, the power that unlocks is tremendous.
Yeah. So what's changed for you?
So much. I mean, that's a loaded question. I think, listen, when I wrote A Guide to Thriving, one of the reasons why I did it is because I wish I would have had a book like that 10 years ago. I wish I would have learned a lot of the things that I've learned over the past 10 years then. And at the time, to me, I measured my life with 3 sticks. The stick of wealth, how much money I could make. The stick of status, what was my title and when was my next promotion going to come up. And the stick of power, how big was my team, how much could I influence people around me, etc. And today I look back and I realize that is such a reductionist way to look at the world. And because no matter how much more I got with on either of those, right, it didn't mean that I was thriving more and that my quality of life improved and that the quality of life of those around me improved. At a certain point, there's diminishing returns. Yes, of course, we all want to make money and be successful and all those good stuff. I think that's great. What I'm suggesting is that there's much more to life than that. There is relationships, the way we connect with others. There's mastery, learning to be really, really good at something. And then there's the importance of autonomy, of the ability to make choices, or agency, the ability to make choices and to influence our environment as much as our environment influences us.
Yeah, I think that's. It's so powerful, and your story is so compelling, and I think that you share it so openly. It's. How is Adriana doing?
She's doing better. Thank you for asking. We were lucky enough to get her on a medication that Health Canada only approved in 2021. It's a biologic, and she's doing really well. She's my hero. She is.
Yeah, she sounds like she is, and this is where you're also saying that these things are real, and we can make a choice to see things differently. We can see things with agency. And when we do that, we change the way we look at the world. And when we change the way that we look at the world we look at changes. And that's what's
Beautifully
happened to
said.
you.
Yes. Yes.
That's amazing. I know we could talk for a long time, Jon, and I hope we get the opportunity to do it again. But our time is coming to a close. At this time in the podcast, we always do a shout out to a former guest. His name was Jon Rosemberg, and he gave us a great napkin, which was "What you appreciate appreciates." That napkin that he gave us 11 years ago turned into a movement of gratitude around the world. He created a company around it called Giftology. He suddenly passed away about a year ago. And ever since, we've been calling him out and trying to pay forward the gift that he gave us about appreciation. With that in mind, is there someone you'd like to appreciate and shout out today?
Well, I'd like to appreciate you for opening this space and for giving me the opportunity to share these ideas and for engaging with these ideas in such a critical way. It's a real honor to be able to talk to your listeners, and it's a real and I appreciate everybody who's listening, because attention is a scarce resource these days, and the fact that people are willing to engage with ideas in a critical way, it's very meaningful. So thank you.
Thank you, Jon. What a powerful conversation. Jon's message lingers. Survival is instinct and thriving is a choice. Maybe as you listened, you started to notice moments in your own life where that choice shows up. The quiet times where you play it safe. The opportunities you pass on because the risk feels too high. Or the days when you've mistaken being busy for being alive. Jon reminded us that thriving isn't something we stumble into. It's something we create, one conscious decision at a time. Here are 5 ideas from today's conversation worth sitting with. Awareness precedes agency. Change comes the moment you start to notice your own patterns. Thriving requires safety. Calm your system before you try to grow. Rewrite the old story. Stop defending who you were and start creating who you're becoming, who you really are. Choose energy over effort. Presence matters more than performance, and thriving is contagious. When you thrive, others rise with you. Take a moment today to reflect on which of these resonates most deeply, because in the end, thriving isn't a destination, it's a decision, one you can make right now. And maybe that's where it begins for you. If this resonated with you, I hope you share it with somebody else who needs to hear it. And otherwise, like and subscribe to Paper Napkin Wisdom everywhere you listen to podcasts. Remember, we're all about ideas small enough to fit on a napkin, but big enough to change your life. Make it a great day.